The way home finds you. The storm arrived without warning. One of those sudden, theatrical summer tempests that turned the sky charcoal and made the air feel charged, as if the whole town were holding its breath. Joe was halfway through closing the hardware store when the power cut out, plunging the aisles into darkness. He sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped outside. Rain hammered the pavement. The streetlights flickered, then surrendered. Across the road, the diner's neon sign sputtered and died. That was when he saw her, Sally, standing under the awning, arms wrapped around herself, hair damp from the first wave of rain. She looked up at him with a half-smile that carried equal parts annoyance and amusement. "Let me guess," she called out. "You didn't pay the electric bill again?" Joe laughed. "If I didn't, the whole town wouldn't be in the dark." "Fair point." She stepped out from the awning, rain catching in her eyelashes. Joe felt something shift, something he'd been ignoring for months. Before he could say anything, a truck pulled up. Bob leaned out the window, grinning like the storm was a personal challenge. "Town meeting at the community center," Bob said. "Power's out everywhere. They want volunteers." Sally raised an eyebrow at Joe. "You coming?" He nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was agreeing to help the town or just following her. The community center buzzed with the low hum of worried voices. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies. Rachel stood at the front, clipboard in hand, trying to maintain order. "Okay, everyone," she said, projecting her voice. "We need teams to check on the elderly, clear fallen branches, and help set up temporary lighting." Jimmy, who had been leaning against the wall pretending not to care, stepped forward. "I'll take the north side. Trees are already coming down." Rachel nodded, grateful. "Thank you." Joe, Sally, and Bob joined the group forming near the supply table. Sally nudged Joe with her shoulder. "You look like you're thinking too hard," she said. "I'm thinking just enough," he replied. "About what?" He hesitated. "About how storms make people honest." She blinked, surprised by the softness in his voice. Before she could respond, Rachel approached. "You three," she said. "I need you to check the Old Mill Road. The power lines there are ancient." Bob clapped his hands. "Adventure time." Sally rolled her eyes. "It's a flooded dirt road, Bob. Not a treasure hunt." But Joe noticed the way she smiled afterward. Small, secret, almost hopeful. The rain eased as they drove, leaving the world washed and glistening. The truck's headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the narrow road ahead. Bob drove. Sally sat in the middle, Joe by the window. Every so often, Sally's knee brushed Joe's. Each time, he felt it like a spark. They reached the bend where the old oak had fallen across the road. The three climbed out, assessing the damage. "We'll need to move it," Bob said. Joe nodded. "We can do it." As they worked, Sally held the flashlight steady, her face glowing in the beam. When Joe looked up, she was watching him, not casually, not accidentally, but with a quiet intensity that made his breath catch. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just thinking." "Storms make people honest," she reminded him. He swallowed. "Then maybe I should say something honest." She stepped closer. "Maybe you should." But before he could speak, Jimmy's truck appeared at the top of the hill, horn blaring. "Tree down on the south road." Jimmy shouted, "We need everyone." Sally exhaled, the moment slipping away like water through fingers. "Later," she said softly. Joe nodded, though the word later felt both promising and unbearably fragile. By dawn, the storm had passed. The town was quiet, washed clean, the sky a pale, forgiving blue. Volunteers gathered at the center again, exhausted but proud. Rachel handed out coffee. Bob bragged about lifting the tree, basically single-handedly. Jimmy pretended he hadn't been worried all night. The usual rhythms returned, but Joe kept scanning the crowd for Sally. He found her outside, sitting on the steps, watching the sunrise. He sat beside her. Neither spoke for a moment. Then she said, "You never finished your honest thought." He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the truth settle in his chest. I think, he said quietly, that I've been falling for you for a long time, and last night just made it impossible to ignore. Sally's breath caught. A slow smile spread across her face. Good, she whispered, because I've been waiting for you to say it. The sun rose higher, warming the steps, warming them both. The storm had taken the lights, shaken the town, and rearranged the night, but it had also given them this. A beginning. The morning after the storm felt like the world had been rinsed clean. Branches littered the sidewalks, puddles reflected the pale gold sky, and the air carried that strange, hopeful quiet that only follows a night of chaos. People emerged from their homes slowly, blinking into the new day as if they weren't quite sure what they'd find. Joe arrived early at the community center, partly to help, partly because he hoped Sally might be there. He found Bob first, leaning against the tailgate of his truck, sipping coffee like he'd earned a medal. "Morning, hero," Bob said. "Sleep at all?" "A little," Joe replied. "You?" "Not a chance. Too much adrenaline. Also, Jimmy snores like a tractor." Jimmy, sweeping debris nearby, didn't look up. "I heard that." Rachel stepped out of the center with a clipboard tucked under her arm, her hair pulled into a messy bun that somehow made her look even more capable than usual. She scanned the group, checking off names. "We've got a long day ahead," she said. "But the worst is over." Joe nodded, but his attention drifted toward the road. He didn't have to wait long. Sally appeared, walking with that steady, unhurried stride he'd always admired. She wore a faded sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back loosely, strands escaping in the breeze. When she saw him, her expression softened, just a little, but enough. "Morning," she said. "Morning." Bob elbowed Jimmy. "And here we go." Jimmy smirked. "About time." Rachel shot them both a look that could have cut through steel. "Unless you two want to clean the entire South Road alone, I'd keep quiet." They shut up immediately. The day unfolded in a rhythm of work and laughter. The five of them, Joe, Sally, Bob, Jimmy, and Rachel, formed a natural team, each falling into roles that fit them perfectly. Bob hauled branches like they weighed nothing, cracking jokes that made the work lighter. Jimmy climbed ladders with reckless confidence, clearing gutters and roofs while Rachel shouted reminders not to break his neck. Rachel organized everything with calm authority, turning chaos into a checklist. Sally moved from house to house, checking on neighbors with a warmth that made people relax instantly. Joe worked beside her whenever he could, grateful for every shared moment. At one house, an elderly woman insisted they take cookies as thanks. Sally laughed as she handed one to Joe. "You know," she said, "you're different today." "How so?" "Quieter. But in a good way. Like you're settled." He considered that. "Maybe I am." She looked at him for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Rachel called for help with a fallen fence, and the moment dissolved, but not completely. By sunset, the town was mostly restored. The lights flickered back on one neighborhood at a time, and cheers echoed through the streets. People gathered outside, relieved, grateful, tired in the best way. The five of them ended up on the hill overlooking the lake, a place they'd all known since childhood but rarely visited together anymore. The sky glowed orange and pink, the water reflecting every color. Bob stretched out on the grass. "We should do this more often." Jimmy snorted. "What? Survive natural disasters?" "No," Bob said. "Be together." Rachel smiled, softening. "He's right." Sally sat beside Joe, knees drawn up, watching the lake. "You never finished telling me what storms make you realize," she said quietly. He turned to her. The fading light caught her face, warm and gentle. "I realized," he said, "that I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel something for you." Her breath hitched. "Joe, I know it's sudden. I know last night was crazy, but I've felt this for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it." Sally looked down at her hands, then back at him. "It's not sudden," she whispered. "I've felt it too." He exhaled, relief washing through him. She reached for his hand, fingers brushing his before settling there, warm and certain. Behind them, Bob whispered loudly to Jimmy, finally. Rachel smacked him with a rolled-up map. But Joe barely heard them. The world had narrowed to the feeling of Sally's hand in his, the quiet certainty of it, the sense that something long overdue had finally found its place. The storm had shaken the town, but it had also cleared a path, one they were just beginning to walk. The hill emptied slowly as the sky dimmed, each friend peeling off toward home with the satisfied exhaustion of a day spent doing something that mattered. By the time the last streaks of pink faded from the lake, only Joe and Sally remained. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. The air between them felt full. Of everything said, everything unsaid, everything waiting. Sally leaned back on her hands, watching the first stars appear. "It's strange," she murmured, "how a storm can make a place feel more like home." Joe glanced at her. "Maybe it's not the storm." She smiled, soft and knowing. "Maybe not." A breeze moved through the grass, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Joe shifted closer, not touching her yet, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I meant what I said earlier," he said. "All of it. I know." She turned toward him, her expression open in a way he'd rarely seen. "And I meant what I said too." He reached for her hand again, slower this time, giving her space to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like they'd been doing it for years. For a moment, the world felt impossibly still. The next morning, the town returned to its usual rhythm. Kids biked to school. Shopkeepers swept their doorsteps. The diner's neon sign buzzed back to life. But something subtle had shifted. Between all five of them, Bob was unusually cheerful, humming as he restocked the hardware store shelves. Jimmy kept checking his phone, pretending he wasn't waiting for a message from Rachel. Rachel, clipboard in hand, looked more relaxed than anyone had seen her in months. And Joe. Joe couldn't stop replaying the feeling of Sally's hand in his. He found her at the diner, tying her apron behind her back. She looked up when he walked in, and the smile that spread across her face was small but unmistakably real. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep. Good or bad?" "Good," he said. "Very good." Her cheeks warmed. "Coffee. Only if you sit with me for a minute." She hesitated, glancing at the clock. "I've got 2 minutes before the breakfast rush." "That's all I need." She poured 2 cups and slid into the booth across from him. The morning light caught in her hair, turning it gold at the edges. "So," she said, fingers tapping the mug, "what happens now?" Joe considered the question carefully. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out with you." Her tapping stopped. Her eyes softened. "Yeah," she whispered. "Me too." By afternoon, the town council announced a follow-up meeting to plan long-term repairs. Rachel roped everyone into attending. Bob, Jimmy, Joe, Sally. They gathered in the same community center where the storm had first thrown them together. But this time, the energy was different. People were tired, frustrated, worried about costs, timelines, insurance. Voices rose. Tempers flared. The storm had passed, but the aftermath was only beginning. Sally squeezed Joe's hand under the table. "This is going to get messy," she whispered. "Yeah," he said. "But we'll get through it." Across the room, Jimmy and Rachel exchanged a look, one that held its own quiet tension, its own unspoken story. Bob leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, trying not to roll his eyes at the bickering. The meeting dragged on. Plans were debated, revised, abandoned, rebuilt. By the end, everyone was drained. But as they stepped outside into the cool evening air, something became clear. Whatever came next, repairs, disagreements, long days, harder decisions, they weren't facing it alone. They were becoming something like a team, something like a family, something that had been forming long before the storm, but only now had a name. Joe looked at Sally, and she looked back, and in that glance was a promise. This was just the beginning. The evening after the long council meeting settled over the town like a sigh, quiet, a little frayed, but full of the kind of possibility that only shows up after people have argued themselves tired. The sky was a soft lavender, the kind that made the street lamps glow warmer than usual. Joe walked Sally home, their steps unhurried. The sidewalks were still damp from the storm, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and wet pavement. They didn't talk much at first. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, more like the kind that forms when two people are learning the shape of being near each other. Sally nudged him gently with her shoulder. "You handled that meeting better than I did." "You didn't throw anything," he said. "That's already better than half the room." She laughed, the sound light and tired. "I almost threw my pen at Bob when he suggested we just wing it. He meant well." "He always means well. That's the problem." They reached her porch, the light above the door flickering back to life after a day without power. She paused on the first step, turning toward him. "Today was a lot," she said. "Yeah. But I'm glad you were there." Joe felt the words settle somewhere deep. "Me too." For a moment, neither moved. The porch light buzzed softly. A moth circled lazily. The world felt suspended again, the way it had on the hill. Sally stepped closer, her voice quieter. "I'm not rushing anything. I just want to be honest." "Good," Joe said. "I want that too." She reached up, brushed a raindrop, or maybe a stray tear of humidity, from his cheek. Her fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary. "Good night, Joe." "Good night, Sally." He walked home with a feeling he hadn't had in years, something like hope, something like steadiness, something like the beginning of a life he hadn't realized he'd been waiting for. The next morning, the town felt almost normal again. Kids waited for the school bus. The bakery reopened. The hardware store buzzed with people replacing what the storm had broken. But trouble rarely announces itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives quietly, tucked inside an envelope. Rachel found it first. She was sorting through the community center's mail when she froze, staring at a thick packet stamped with the county seal. Jimmy, who had been pretending to fix a loose chair leg, noticed her expression. "What's that?" he asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She opened the envelope, scanned the first page, and her shoulders tensed. "Funding cuts," she said. "For storm recovery. They're reducing what they promised." Jimmy stood. "By how much?" "By a lot." He took the papers from her, flipping through them. "This is ridiculous. We can't fix half the damage with this." Rachel rubbed her forehead. "We'll have to tell everyone." Jimmy hesitated. "You don't have to do it alone." She looked up at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. "I know." But the truth was, she'd been carrying the town on her shoulders for months, long before the storm. And now the weight had doubled. By afternoon, word had spread. People gathered again at the community center, tired, anxious, frustrated. Joe, Sally, Bob, Jimmy, and Rachel stood together at the front. A united front even if none of them felt particularly steady. Rachel explained the cuts. The room erupted. Some people demanded answers. Others blamed the council. A few insisted they could fix everything themselves. One man shouted that the storm was a sign the town was cursed, which Bob loudly declared, "The dumbest thing I've ever heard." Through it all, Sally watched Joe. He was calm, steady, grounding. When the room grew too loud, he stepped forward. "We've gotten through worse," he said. "And we'll get through this. But we have to do it together." The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. Rachel exhaled, grateful. Jimmy stood beside her, arms crossed, ready to back her up if needed. Sally squeezed Joe's hand. Bob muttered something about forming a volunteer crew, with a very cool name. The meeting didn't end with answers, but it ended with a direction. And sometimes, that's enough. After the meeting, the five of them lingered outside. The sky was overcast again, but not threatening, just thoughtful. Rachel looked exhausted. Jimmy noticed. "You don't have to carry all of this," he said quietly. She gave a tired smile. "Someone has to. Then let it be all of us." She blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Jimmy." He shrugged. Suddenly shy. We're better when we're not pretending we don't need each other. Rachel looked at him for a long moment, something softening in her expression, something that had been locked away for a long time. Meanwhile, Sally slipped her hand into Joe's again. You were good in there, she said. So were you. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Feels like everything's changing. Maybe it's supposed to. She looked up at him, eyes steady. Then let's not miss it. Joe kissed her forehead. Gentle, certain. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask for anything except truth. The storm had shaken the town. The funding cuts had rattled it again. But something stronger was forming in the cracks, something that felt like a beginning, not an ending. And for the first time, all 5 of them could feel it. They weren't just reacting to the storm anymore. They were building something new. The next few days moved in a rhythm that felt both familiar and newly fragile. The storm had passed, the funding cuts had landed, and the town was trying to find its footing again. People patched roofs, cleared debris, and argued about budgets in the grocery store aisles. Life went on, but with an undercurrent of tension, like a song played slightly off-key. Joe felt it most when he walked through town with Sally. Folks waved, smiled, thanked them for helping during the storm. But behind the gratitude was worry. Everyone knew the repairs would take longer now. Everyone knew the town would have to stretch itself thin. Sally squeezed his hand as they passed the old mill road. We'll figure it out, she said. I know, Joe replied. I just wish it didn't always feel like we're one bad day away from falling apart. She looked at him, steady and warm. Maybe that's why we hold each other up. He didn't say anything, but the truth of it settled deep. Bob burst into the hardware store the next morning with the kind of energy that made Joe brace himself. I've got it, Bob announced. The solution. The answer. The thing that's going to save the town. Joe crossed his arms. Is this like the time you tried to fix the water tower with duct tape? That was one time, Bob said. And it almost worked. Joe sighed. Okay. What's the idea? A fundraiser, Bob said. A big one. A festival. Music, food, games, the whole deal. We bring in people from neighboring towns. We raise money. We show the county we're not giving up. Joe blinked. That's actually not bad. Bob grinned. I know. I'm as shocked as you are. They brought the idea to Rachel, who stared at Bob like he'd just spoken fluent poetry. This could work, she said slowly. If we plan it right. Jimmy leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I can get the stage set up. And maybe talk to the band from the next town over. Sally smiled. I can get the diner to cater. And I know a few people who'd volunteer. Joe looked around at all of them, this strange, mismatched group that somehow fit together perfectly. Then let's do it, he said. And just like that, the town had a new direction. Planning the festival took over everything. Rachel built schedules and spreadsheets. Jimmy handled equipment and logistics. Bob recruited volunteers with the enthusiasm of a man running for office. Sally coordinated food vendors and made the diner the unofficial headquarters. Joe fixed anything that broke, which was almost everything. The town buzzed with a kind of hopeful chaos. People painted signs, tested lights, argued about where to put the lemonade stand. Kids practiced dances. The high school band rehearsed until the neighbors begged them to stop. One evening, after a long day of hauling tables, Joe found Sally sitting on the diner steps, sipping iced tea. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just tired. But the good kind. He sat beside her. Feels like the whole town is waking up. Maybe it needed something to believe in, she said. He looked at her, the fading sunlight catching her hair. I know I did. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and the world felt steady again. The festival was set for the next morning. The town square was transformed. String lights hung from trees. Booths lined the sidewalks. The stage stood proudly at the center. It looked like something out of a storybook. Rachel walked the grounds with her clipboard, checking everything twice. Jimmy followed her, pretending he wasn't watching her more than the equipment. Bob tested the microphone. Check, check. This is your captain speaking. Bob, Rachel warned. Right. Sorry. Sally and Joe stood near the stage, taking it all in. The lights glowed softly. The air smelled like fresh paint and anticipation. "You think people will come?" Sally asked. Joe nodded. "Yeah, I do." She slipped her hand into his. "Tomorrow feels big." "It is." She looked up at him, eyes warm. "Whatever happens, I'm glad we're in it together." He kissed her, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that anchors you. The kind that says I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Behind them, Bob whispered to Jimmy, finally. Jimmy elbowed him. "They've been together for days." "Still counts," Bob said. Rachel rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. The lights flickered on fully, bathing the square in a soft, golden glow. The town felt alive, ready, hopeful. Tomorrow would change everything. And none of them knew just how much. Festival morning arrived bright and impossibly clear, the kind of day that felt like it had been ordered specially. Sunlight spilled across the town square, catching on the string lights that had stayed up all night, turning them into tiny sparks. Volunteers bustled around with last-minute tasks, hanging signs, testing speakers, arranging tables of homemade pies and crafts. Joe stood near the stage, hands on his hips, taking it all in. It didn't look like a small town scrambling after a storm. It looked like a place that believed in itself. Sally approached with 2 cups of lemonade. "You look like someone who's trying not to panic." "I'm not panicking," Joe said. "I'm pre-panicking." She laughed and handed him a cup. "Drink. Hydrate your anxiety." He took a sip. "This is terrible." "I know," she said proudly. "I made it." He grinned, and the knot in his chest loosened. Across the square, Bob was giving instructions to a group of teenagers who were clearly ignoring him. Jimmy was testing the sound system, tapping the microphone with a seriousness that made Rachel hover nearby, ready to intervene. The town was waking up, and it was beautiful. By mid-morning, people began to arrive, first in small clusters, then in steady waves. Families with strollers, teenagers in groups, elderly couples holding hands, folks from neighboring towns, even a few vendors who hadn't been officially invited but showed up anyway, drawn by the energy. The square filled with music, laughter, the smell of grilled corn and cinnamon pastries. Kids ran between booths. The high school band played slightly off-key but with enormous enthusiasm. Rachel stood near the information tent, clipboard in hand, watching the crowd with a look that was half disbelief, half relief. Jimmy joined her, offering a bottle of water. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she corrected. He hesitated, then added, "You look happy." She glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "I am." Around noon, Joe and Sally walked through the festival together, stopping to talk with neighbors, sampling food, helping wherever needed. It felt natural, easy in a way that surprised them both. But as they reached the center of the square, a hush rippled through the crowd. People turned toward the road. A black SUV pulled up. A man stepped out. County official. Suit too crisp for a summer festival. Expression unreadable. Rachel stiffened. Jimmy moved closer to her instinctively. The official approached the group. "I heard about your event," he said. "Quite the turnout." Rachel nodded cautiously. "We're raising funds for storm recovery." He surveyed the booths, the crowds, the music. Impressive. Very impressive. Joe felt Sally's hand tighten around his. The official continued. "I'll be honest. When the funding cuts were announced, we didn't expect this." He gestured around. "Community engagement at this scale is rare." Rachel's voice was steady. "We're not giving up on our town." He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll take this back to the board. We may be able to revisit the allocation." A collective breath seemed to release across the square. Rachel blinked, stunned. Jimmy whispered, "You did it." But she shook her head. "No, we all did." The festival stretched into evening, lanterns glowing softly as the sky deepened to blue. Music drifted across the square. People danced. Kids chased fireflies. The town felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Joe and Sally found themselves back on the hill overlooking the lake, just as they had after the storm. The lights of the festival shimmered below like a constellation. Sally leaned against him. "Do you realize what today was?" "A miracle?" Joe said. "A beginning," she corrected gently. He wrapped an arm around her. "I like beginnings." She looked up at him, eyes warm. "Then let's keep choosing them." He kissed her, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that didn't need an audience or a perfect moment. The kind that simply said yes. Behind them, laughter drifted from the festival. Somewhere, Bob was probably telling a story too loudly. Rachel and Jimmy were likely still working side by side, pretending not to notice how close they stood. The town had been shaken, tested, stretched thin. But it had found its way back, stronger, brighter, more connected. And Joe and Sally had found something too. Not just each other. A way home. The festival didn't fix everything, but it changed the town's rhythm. In the weeks that followed, the square stayed lively in a way it hadn't been in years. People lingered longer at the diner. Kids played outside until the streetlights flickered on. Neighbors who barely spoke before now waved across fences, shared tools, swapped stories. Joe felt the shift most in the quiet moments, unlocking the hardware store in the morning, walking home at dusk, hearing laughter drift from porches. The storm had shaken the town awake, and the festival had given it something to move toward. Sally noticed it too. She'd always loved the diner, but now it felt like the heart of something bigger. People came not just for food but for connection. She found herself smiling more, humming while she worked, catching Joe's eye through the window when he passed by. Their relationship settled into something steady and warm. Not dramatic, not rushed. Just two people choosing each other again, and again in the small, ordinary ways that matter most. Rachel had spent so long being the one who held everything together that she didn't know how to let go. But the festival, and the funding reversal, had shown her something she hadn't expected. She didn't have to do it alone. Jimmy became her quiet anchor. He didn't push. He didn't hover. He just showed up, fixing things, carrying things, listening when she needed to talk and distracting her when she didn't. Their connection grew in the spaces between tasks, in the shared glances, in the way he always seemed to know when she needed a break. One evening, after a long day of planning the next phase of repairs, Rachel found him waiting outside the center, with 2 sodas. "You look like you need this," he said. She took it, smiling. "You always know." "Not always," he said. "Just with you." It was the first time she let herself lean into him, even just a little.